Mitzvah Shem will be starting Seder Moyed, starting with Masechta Shabbos. A mashal of introduction to Seder Moyed discusses the different Yom Tovim, starting with Masechta Shabbos and Erevin, followed by Psachim, Shkolim, V'chulu, Tul Chagiga. The concept of Moyed, the Gemara in Shabbos tells us that V'hoya Emunas Itecha Chais in Yeshua is Chochmas V'das, that Itecha is Seder Moyed. Itim, this Itim, it's the Rambam, when he discusses the Yom Tovim, has a sefer called Zmanim. So I saw a question once, what's the idea that it's L'chayra, all the Sidorim of Mishnayos, is Roim, is Lashon Rabim, Noshim, is Lashon Rabim, Nezikin, is Lashon Rabim, Kachim, Taris, it's all Lashon Rabim. When it comes to the Seder Moyed, it's Lashon Yachid. So I saw that Reb Chaim Kanievsky gave a teretz that Moyed is not Lashon Yachid. Moyed is Milashon Oil Moyed, a Beis Vad, a place where you come together. It's automatically with more than one person. So it's automatically more than one. So Moed in and of itself is Lashon. Moed in and of itself is Lashon Rabbim. The concept of Shabbos and Yom Tovim are Zman of Kedusha for Klal Yisrael. Shabbos, you know, is Kvi V'Kaima. Klal Yisrael doesn't have to do anything to make Shabbos happen. But Mekadosh Yisrael V'Azmanim, the Yom Tovim come about because the Yidden are Mekadosh the Chodesh, and through that comes the Zmanim where they're Mekadosh. It's up to us, it's B'Yadeinu to do. But either way, whether it's Shabbos al Tzkvi V'Kaimer, whether it's Yom Tovim because of Mekadosh Yisrael V'Azmanim, either way, these are very special Zmanim in which Klal Yisrael has the opportunity to connect to the Rebbeinu Shalom at a much higher level than a regular average day. So with this, we'd like to introduce Masechta Shabbos, 24 prakim. It's very long. There are many halachas. The Torah writes at the beginning of Siman Shin Aleph that there's so many halachas you wouldn't be able to be mefaret to all of them. Wouldn't be shaykh. It would take forever. Another concept is we know that the Mishnah Berurah brings from Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz in his Akdama to Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel that if a person doesn't learn Hilchos Shabbos, chances are he's going to be over on something. There are many pratim, many klalim, starting with the Lamites Malachas. Those are the Avos Malachas. It could be there even more than Lamites Avos Malachas. Told us, it's not possible to be mefaret all of them. But besides the Isurim of Shabbos, there's the Kedusha Shabbos, there's a mitzvah of Kavod Shabbos, there's a mitzvah of Einik Shabbos, and these mitzvahs also play a very strong role in how a Shabbos is supposed to be. So with this, let's start. Pasuk Shteit, Zachar Shem Shabbos Lakatshoy, Sheishes Yomim Tavod, Vasisa, this is in Parshas Yisro, in the Seres Adibris, Sheishes Yomim Tavod, Vasisa Kam Lachtecha, V'yom HaShvi, Shabbos Hashem Lekecha Lesaza Kam Alocha. Zachar Shem Shabbos Lakatshoy, remember the day of Shabbos to make it holy. 6 days you shall work and do all your work and do all your labor. Vasisa Kam Lachtecha, V'yom HaShvi, Shabbos Hashem Lekecha, the seventh day is Shabbos to Hashem. Lesaza Kam Alocha, you shall not perform any malacha. The Torah is B'tzav Yidden to observe Shabbos in two ways. To say that Shabbos is holy, which is fulfilled by reciting the Tfilos of Shabbos and the Kiddush, and to refrain from doing malacha. However, the Torah is not mafarish what malacha means in this context. The only malacha that we know in the Torah is lighting a fire, which is big machlokes in the Gemara, is havara l'chalek yatzas or havara l'lav yatzas. It's interesting, in the first part of being Mekadosh Shabbos, there's a famous Reb Kveger, it's brought in all the Paiskim, that midoraisa, if the concept is just to mention the idea of Shabbos by being zoicher, just by mentioning it, Reb Kveger says that even if a person just says good Shabbos to somebody else, he's being masker Shabbos, that in of itself is enough to be Mekadosh Shabbos. Obviously, there's still a mitzvah to make Kiddush, even if you were already Yotzi or Chiyav. The concept isn't just to be Yotzi on everything, but the concept is to do the mitzvahs with a Gishmak and Besimcha also. The definition of malacha is learned out from different psukim where the Torah repeats the Isser against performing malacha immediately before it describes the construction of the Mishkan. By mentioning these two concepts together, the Torah's merames that the malachas that were also on Shabbos, are those malachas that were required for the binyan HaMishkan. So the Eglei Tal in the beginning brings the Shitas Rav Haigoin that it wasn't the malachas that were necessary for the binyan HaMishkan, but it was a malachas necessary for the day-to-day avodah in the Mishkan, which is shver on many fronts, as the Eglei Tal goes on to explain. Again, now we're not going to get through all the pratim of Hilchos Shabbos now and go through every Eglei Tal and every Mishnah Berurah, but Mitzvah Shem will cover some ground. So first of all, we have the Lamites Malachas. The Mishnah's term for malachas forbidden on Shabbos is malacha, And in Perek Zayin, the Mishnah mentions the 39 malachas. It's not 39 malachas, but it's 39 categories of malachas. Activities similar to any one of these 39 malachas are also asur. So we have avis and toldos, the primary malachas and the toldos of the malachas. Since the 39 malachas listed in the Mishnah are avis malachas, activities that are also because they're similar to one of the 39 malachas are called toldos, which means descendants, the children of, or they're derived from the av of the malacha. The toldos are also asur min Torah, and one who performs any of them is liable to the same einshim as one who performs any one of the avos. Meaning there's no difference if someone's over on an av or someone's over on a tolda, the einshim is going to be the same. Hagam, there are places in the Gemara where the Gemara has a habit meaning to be, yes, be mechalek between avos and toldos, but the Gemara right away says you can't do that. For example, the first of the avos malachas is zayreya, planting. This is a category of malacha that includes not only planting a seed or a sapling in the ground, but also any other malacha or any activity that would cause any vegetation to grow, such as watering a plant or soaking grains in water. These last two activities are toldos of the malacha of planting. So the four basic concepts that we have to know throughout the Masechta, and really not just for Masechta Shabbos, but for most places throughout Shas, is there's chayiv, potter, mutter, and aser. Chayiv means a person is chayiv einish. Potter means that he's not chayiv einish. Now, just because he's not chayiv a punishment, just because he's not getting penalized, does not mean that what he's doing is going to be mutter. Mutter means it's 100% allowed and permitted to do. Also means that the Rabbanon did not allow to do it. In addition to the Isurei Malacha Deraisa, the Rabbanon issued many gzeros and many takanas designed to prevent people from being over on the laws of the deraisas. So generally, the Mishnah distinguishes between the deraisas and the Rabbanans by using the term chayiv and potter. One who inadvertently, which means by mistake, performs a biblical malacha on Shabbos is mechuyev to bring a chatas to the Beis HaMikdash to be mechaper for his aveira, while one who b'shoigeg is over on the Rabbanon is potter from having to bring a korban. Therefore, where the Mishnah says with regard to the Hilchah Shabbos, the one who does a certain act is chayiv, it means that the act is asur min Torah. If the Mishnah says it's potter, it means that he's potter from bringing a korban, but the act is going to be asur min Rabbanon. This malach is going to be asur min Rabbanon. Regarding an act that's mutter, even according to the Rabbanon, the Mishnah will use the term mutter. There are, however, a few exceptions where the Mishnah will say that one is exempt from a certain act, but it means that it's mutter. Now, another big concept that's discussed throughout Masechta Shabbos is if something is done b'shoigeg or something is done b'mezid. B'ikar, in the beginning of Klal Gadol, in the beginning of the 7th parak, this is where it's discussed in the Gemara. One who performs a malacha on Shabbos is mechuyev skila, which is he has to be stoned by Bezdin. As with any other chiyuv Bezdin, one is not mechuyev misas Bezdin unless he acted b'mezid deliberately, that is, with knowledge that what he was doing was asur. In addition, he's not going to be killed in Bezdin unless he sinned in the presence of two Edom Ksherim immediately after they gave him a hasra that this is asur, and what einish he's going to get if he does it. If any of these conditions are not met, the person who did the aveira is not going to be nenash, he's not going to be punished in Bezdin Shalmata. Rather, he's subject to the punishment of kares. The punishment of kares means that it takes one or more of several forms. Either he's going to die young, or his future generations are going to die, or he's going to lose his place in Olam Haba, as the Ramban is marich in Parashat Acharei Mos. So, kares is an einish from Bezdin Shalmaila. It's not up to Bezdin Shalmata to be mechayiv anybody kares. A person who does malacha b'shoigeg is not mechuyev a misas Bezdin or kares. He must bring a chatos to be mechaper for his avera. If somebody did it b'shoigeg, he did it out of ignorance. Either he didn't know that this malacha was asur, or he didn't know that they were Shabbos. Okay. Another very important concept is, throughout the malachas we're going to be discussing, is what is a malachas v'chshavas. Malachas v'chshavas is the Torah asurs only something that was done b'machshava, intentional or calculated. This too is learned out from the psukim of the Mishkan. The Torah describes Bezalel, who led the construction of the Mishkan. It says Hashem filled him with chachma, and the pasuk continues to perform every manner of malachas machshavas. The Chacham learned from these words that one is not going to be mechuyev for doing a malacha on Shabbos unless it was done machshavas. Two concepts are implied over here. There's intent and also design. The concept of intent requires that the act to be planned out, and the plan should be accomplished. The concept of design implies that the malacha should be creative or part of a creative process. The difficulty with this becomes with hoitzah, because you're not, if you're doing goizes, you're shearing wool of the sheep, so you're making a change. The goal was that to remove the wool from the sheep. Now you did that. But when you're doing hoitzah, you're just moving an item, you're moving an apple from your front yard to the street, or from the front of your house into your house. So why is that considered a malacha? Why is that considered malacha machshavas? Yeah, avada, I want it from point A to avada, my plan is to move from point A to point B. But that's why Taisus on Daf Beis in Shabbos calls hoitzah malacha grua, because this concept of having the design and this cheshbon of it doesn't apply to hoitzah as much as it does to other ones, and makes things more complex. Now, what about the concept of Melechas B'Chshavas is that it has to be a Melacha Chashuva. The concept that the Torah asks is only Melechas B'Chshavas has also sort of Avos and Taldas. So the Teitzah of this is going to be Misasek, Davar She'enim Miskaven, and Psik Reisha, Mekalkel, Kalach Hayad, and Melacha She'enim Tzricha L'Gufa, and we'll go through each one slowly. When a person does something accidentally without any intention of doing it, without even realizing that it may happen, this act is called masasek. He unwittingly did something. Since his act was an accident, he's not considered to have done an aveira. Let's say a person always flicks off the light when he leaves the room. And as he's leaving the room, he flicked off the light and then he's like, oh, it's Shabbos, what should he do now? So that's a masasek. An example would be someone who set out to cut a vegetable that had already been picked, but his hand slipped. And he uprooted a different vegetable that was still growing. So he unwittingly, or accidentally, it's even less than accidentally, he performed the malacha of ktsira. Actually, one who commits this type of malacha is pater, not only in regard to Shabbos, but also most areas of halacha as well, where melechas b'chshavas is not required. This rule, however, has broader applications regarding Hilchos Shabbos. Some Rishonim hold that in the case of Shabbos, even if one intends to perform a malacha and succeeds in doing so, but he does it to an object other than the one that he intended to do it, he's pater because it's not melechas b'chshavas. An example would be he was attempting to pick one vegetable, which is a malacha, but accidentally picked another one instead. So then that would be considered a misasik. In other areas of halacha, by contrast, one would be mechuyev midoraisa of such an act, since he intended to do the aveira. Now, what's a davar she'eino miskaven? When a person does a davar hamuter, and the result of this action, a second forbidden act also occurs. The second act is called a davar she'eino miskaven, an unintentional act. In contrast to misasik, mentioned before, the person in this case realizes that the prohibited act might happen, but he has no intention for it. For example, he drags a chair across the ground in such a way that he makes a ditch, a chritz, in the ground, which is a tolda, or it is the malacha of cheresh, plowing. Although he's aware that he might make a ditch, a chritz in the ground, he does not intend to do so. His only intention is to move the chair from one place to another. Therefore, even if the furrow does result, his act of plowing is unintentional. He is therefore pater from any chiyuvim d'oraisa. However, it's a machlekes tanoim whether such an act is muter midrabanan. Rabbi Yehuda holds that midrabanan it's aser, since the person realizes that the malacha might happen as a result of his action. However, according to Reb Shimon, the act is muter since he did not intend for the malacha to occur. This machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon applies to all isurim of the Torah. However, as far as other isurim are concerned, Rabbi Yehuda holds that davar she'eino miskaven is aser even min Torah, while on Shabbos min Torah it's muter, since it's not melechas machshavas, and the Isser would only be midrabanan. So it's interesting. On Shabbos, the Torah would, even Rabbi Yehuda holds, is more makom to be mekel on Shabbos than in Shar HaTorah. Now, what's a psik reisha? In the previous machlekes of Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon, where it's possible, but not for sure, that the malacha will occur, if the permitted act will definitely result in the malacha, it's also even according to Reb Shimon. For example, Reb Shimon would agree that dragging a heavy chair across soft ground is asur, since in that case we know he's going to be chayrish. This type of situation is known as psik reisha v'lo yamos. I mean, if you know vada that it's going to make a chritz in the ground, it's going to make a furrow in the ground, so then a vada it's going to be asur, and a vada Reb Shimon is going to hold that it's asur over here also. This type of situation is known as psik reisha v'lo yamos. The literal translation of this means, can one cut off its head and will not die? The analogy is drawn to a person who cuts off the head of a chicken, which will inevitably cause the animal's death. Psik reisha means that it's not possible for the malacha not to happen. The malacha will automatically happen. Davar she'eino miskaven is he's not mechaber for it. It may happen, it may not happen. Psik reisha means it will happen. Now, what about mekalkel? Mekalkel is a destructive act. So malacha that's a destructive act is not considered malacha because machshavas you need to have that it's a malacha, and also it should be malacha chashuva, that it's a positive act, it's a constructive act and not a positive act. So a person who's mekalkel is not going to be chayiv, although midrabanan it's going to be also. For instance, although lighting a fire is a malacha of mavir, one's not mechuyev for destroying something by setting it on fire. In some circumstances, however, destruction isn't necessary preparation for something constructive, such as demolishing a structure in order to build a new one in its place, or moichek, erasing something in order to write something else in its place. In those cases, that's where mekalkel is going to be chayiv. These are the actual malachas of this destructive malacha is going to be considered a malacha because it's a malacha chashuva. Now, a person who just stabs and rips up a book to shreds for no apparent reason, that's mekalkel. Maybe also midarabana, but midaraisa, it's not going to be aser. Now, what about kalacher yad rishinui, a malacha that's performed in an unusual manner? One's not mechuyev for doing a malacha in a manner that's significantly different from the normal way of performing the act. Maybe, for example, he carries a spoon in his shoe. Although this too is asim derabanan, as long as the change is significant, the action does not meet the deraisa understanding of a malacha. It's interesting because the Chelkas Machayik in Even Ezer says that the Torah for a malacha done in an unusual manner is also learned out from Melechus Machshavas, because Melechus Machshavas has to be done as a regular malacha. If, for example, a right-handed person writes with his left hand, he's not mechuyev for ksiva, because this is a shinoi, which means change, or kalach hayad with the back of the hand. You wouldn't write with the back of your hand; you write with the front of your hand. So if he's doing that, it's different. So that would be also a p'tor, although maybe also a deraisa. Now, the next thing we're going to discuss is the malacha she'en tzricha legufa, a malacha that's not needed for its defined purpose. Malacha has to have a defined purpose. There's a question whether one who performs a malacha is menater mechuyev if he does it for a defined purpose, or even if he does it for some other reason. This is also machlokes between Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon. Reb Yehuda holds a malacha she'en tzricha legufa is a malacha midaraisa. Reb Shimon holds that it's not a malacha midaraisa. Everyone agrees, however, that a malacha she'en tzricha legufa is going to be also midarabbanan. So machlokes rishonim about what's meant by a malacha hatzricha legufa and malacha she'en tzricha legufa. According to Tosfos, on the Tzadi Daled and Aleph, Reb Shimon holds that a malacha that is asur midaraisa is only asur when it's done to achieve a purpose similar to that for which it was done in the Mishkan. For example, in the construction of the Mishkan, the Krashim, the beams of the Mishkan's walls were transported from Ereshus HaYachid, which was the wagons in which they were transported, to Ereshus HaRabim, which was the place where the Mishkan was being built. The purpose of this malacha was to transfer the beams to the place where they were needed. Therefore, the defined purpose of the malacha of Haitzah, which is transferring from one domain to another, from one Rishus to another Rishus, is transferring an object to the Rishus in which it is needed. One who transfers an object to another Rishus only to remove it from its previous place is not going to be chayiv. Although this too may be constructive and even necessary, it's not the defined purpose of the malacha. It's not the purpose for which this malacha was done in the Mishkan. For this reason, someone who carries a mace out of a house into Rishus HaRabim is going to be pater min HaTorah according to Reb Shimon, because he doesn't need to have the mace in the Rishus HaRabim. The only reason why he's moving it is because he doesn't want the mace in the Rishus HaYachid. Rashi, however, holds that the defined purpose of a malacha hatzricha legufa, is not necessarily the one for which was performed in the construction of the Mishkan. Rather, it refers to the positive purpose that is the essence of the malacha. So according to Reb Shimon, one's not mechuyev for doing a malacha unless he does it for a positive purpose, and not merely to avoid a negative situation. If a person carries something from one rishus to another rishus because he wanted in the second rishus, he's mechuyev because he performed the malacha for a positive purpose, for bringing the item from point A to point B. But if he intends merely to remove the item from the first rishus, like taking the mace out of the house, Reb Shimon would hold that he's not chayiv at all, since the malacha was done for purely a negative reason. So Rashi has a more general understanding of what it means a malacha tzricha legufa, and Tosfos is a little more specific and a little more direct as to understanding a more definitive understanding of what it means a malacha she'en tzricha legufa, that it has to match up to the purpose of what was needed in the Mishkan. Now, there are other isurim and halachas of Shabbos. In addition to the basic isurei deraisa, there are a number of other restrictions that are learned out from various psukim in the Torah. Although most of these restrictions have the force of Dinei HaTorah, they're not as chamor as the Avos Malachos. Somebody who would be over on these things would not be mechuyev skila or kares, and one who is over them b'shegig would not have to bring a chatas. These additional halachas are the following: mechamer, shvisas behemtoi, shvisas benoi, and tchum. What is mechamer achar behemtoi? Min Torah, it's also for a person to perform a malacha together with an animal. It says, Pasuk says that behemtecha also cannot do malacha on Shabbos. The lashon of the pasuk implies that a person and the animal together accomplish the malacha together. The classic example is a person guiding an animal that's carrying a burden. Although this prohibition includes any forbidden malacha performed jointly by his man and an animal, it's generally referred to as mechamer, which would be guiding a loaded animal. Now, number 2, we have shvisas behemtoi, the resting of one's animal. The Torah forbids one who owns an animal to let the animal do malacha even on its own. So mechamer achar behemtoi means when the bailam is doing the malacha together with the animal. Shvisas behemtoi means that the animal is not allowed to do malacha on its own. If the cow would wake up every morning and plow on its own, on Shabbos, that would not be allowed. So one may not allow his animal to go outside on Shabbos carrying a load, even if he doesn't guide it. Some say it's learned out of a pasuk. Over there also. Others, however, hold that this pasuk is referring to mechamer, like we mentioned before. So according to the ones who hold that shvisas behemtoi and mechamer is 2 different things, so the makar for this isser is going to be from the pasuk and on the 7th day you shall desist from works, that your ox and your donkey may be at ease. However, one may let his animal graze on Shabbos, even though it uproots the grass, which is an act of kaitzer. Grazing is mutter, because the pasuk says that your animal should be l'man yanuach. And if you're not going to allow it to eat, so then it's not going to be l'man yanuach, so you have to let the animal eat. I guess the animal also has its own kavod Shabbos. I think Shabbos doesn't have it. Animals cannot have the concept, the musig of oinik does not apply to animals. Now, shvisas benoi. Says Ato bincho v'techa avdecha v'mascha v'emtecha v'garcha shebesharecha. The Torah says that you, your son, and your daughter are not allowed to do malacha on Shabbos. This teaches that a parent may not allow his child to perform any malacha on Shabbos for the sake of the parent. Even if a child decides on his own to perform a malacha for the parent's benefit, the parent is mechuyev to stop the child from doing so. In fact, even one who is not the child's parent is required to stop a child from performing the malacha on his behalf, because by showing him that it's okay, that would be implied that it's by him not telling him that he's not allowed to do it. It's like feeding him, which is not allowed. So obviously they're going to be chilukim in different zachem, but upon this is the general rule. This halacha applies even with respect to children who are younger than the age of chinuch. So technically speaking, if you want a child to turn on a roof of light, so if the child's going to do it by himself on his own without you telling him, if the child's less than chinuch, so I don't know how much you'd be mechuyev to stop him, but there definitely is a concept that even if a child is less than chinuch, you're not allowed to tell him to do. You're not allowed to tell him to do malacha. It's a double push. Okay, now what about tchum? So tchum is big machlekes. It's very unclear the rights of the rabbanon. On Shabbos, a person is not allowed to go more than 2,000 amas from his residence. This is going to be Isser Midrabanon. Obviously, amas, so machlekes had a measure an amma exactly. This limit is known as the Tchum Shabbos, the Shabbos boundary or the Tchum. This Isser is learned out from Psukim in the Torah. However, unlike the previous Isurim, this is Be'ikr Midrabanon. Some Rishonim hold that although going beyond 2,000 amas is Midrabanon, it is an Isser Deraisa to go beyond 12 mil. A mil is 2,000 amas. You're not allowed to go more than 12 mil on Shabbos. It's going to be traveling already. But the psukim that they bring, many Rishonim learn, is only an asmachta ba'alma. A person's tchum is measured from his residence, which is defined as a place where he was when Shabbos began. If he was in a town, the tchum is measured from the town's limits. If he was in an isolated building, the tchum is measured from the outer walls. And if he was out in the open, his residence extends 4 amas from where he is, and the tchum is going to be measured from that area. If I'm not mistaken, the Sefer HaChinuch holds that tchum is deraisa. A person can change his halachic place of residence, and thus his tchum before Shabbos Yom Tov by means of an erev tchumen. He does this by putting food in a place up to 2,000 amas away from his actual residence. So with respect to Hilchos Tchumen, his residence is shifted to that place, and the tchum extends 2,000 amas from there. This does not give him more than the 2,000 amma limit. It merely shifts the point from which it is measured. So whatever he gains in one direction comes at the expense of the opposite direction. So the Mishnah is discussing Eruvin. If a person puts, on, let's say a person is expecting the doctor to come on Shabbos, and he wants to meet with the doctor. Obviously, we're talking a case where it's not pikuach nefesh or anything like that. So he's not sure which direction the doctor is going to be coming from. So can he put an erev tchumen in both areas? So the Mishnah calls it harezah chamor gamol. It's going in both ways. It doesn't really work. It only goes in one way. Now, let's talk about some Yisurim D'Rabbanan. In addition to the halachas of the Yisuri D'Rabbanan that resemble the Yisuri D'Oraisa, which would lead, the reason why they made these takanos were that they shouldn't lead to the Chil of Shabbos. The Chachamim made halachas and takanos to reinforce the concept of Shvisa on Shabbos, and they did this to enhance Kedusha Shabbos. They did so because even a person who avoided all malacha could still theoretically work the entire Shabbos as he does every day, which would still be a zilzal. It's not going to be a etzim chil Shabbos, but it's going to be a zilzal and a mockery of the concept of Shabbos as a day of rest and kedusha. For example, there's no isur deraisa for loading goods and bringing them to the market if it's done with an eruv or whatnot. So, nor is there an isur minat Torah to weigh something, to measure something, buying and selling, packaging, paying and receiving money, hiring workers. In short, many of the major activities of business minat Torah are mutter. The Chacham, however, enacted numerous gzeros and takanos to make sure the Shabbos would be observed with a certain ruach, with a certain kedusha. Although the individual laws of Midrabbanan, they were taken together, they serve as the mitzvah for L'man Yanuach, to rest on Shabbos. So one of the most basic concepts that everyone's familiar with, which is the Isser only Midrabbanan to protect Kedusha Shabbos, is muktzah. One topic that appears throughout the Masechta is halach of muktzah. The term muktzah, which means set aside, refers to objects that in the normal course of events are not expected to be used on Shabbos, either because they're not fit to be used on Shabbos when Shabbos began, if they were not permitted to be used, or because a person set them aside not to be used. The Chacham were geyser that such objects may not be moved on Shabbos. There's also a lesser known yet stricter restriction against eating or consuming something that's muktzah. This is learnt out from Psukim about Daman, where the pasuk says that it fell on the sixth day, and they shall prepare as a sharia of you, and they'll prepare what they bring, and it'll be double what they gather every day. The pasuk implies that Shabbos food must be prepared before Shabbos. A muktzah object being set aside from use is not considered prepared and therefore cannot be eaten on Shabbos. It's raw potatoes, raw meats. It's not something that you're going to eat on Shabbos anyways. So, therefore, that would be a problem on Shabbos as well. This takana, the gzera of muktzah, although midrabanan, can be traced back to the days of Nehemiah, in the beginning of the Tkufas, by Yesheni, as the Gemara Shabbos and Kuf Chav Gimel Merbeis says. An object that was muktzah at the beginning of Shabbos remains muktzah until the end of the day, even if the reason for being muktzah ceases to apply for some reason. For example, fruit that was growing on a tree is muktzah because it cannot be picked on Shabbos. It remains muktzah even if it falls off the tree. So, muktzah, the opposite of muktzah, is something that's mukhan, something that's prepared for use before Shabbos. This preparation does not need to be active. Any object that in the normal course of events stands to be used is considered prepared, it's considered min ha-mukhan, and may be handled and moved about. You're allowed to touch muktzah. You shouldn't touch it if it's going to move it. But touching muktzah doesn't say it anywhere. But you're not allowed to touch the muktzah. You're not allowed to move the muktzah. Only objects which for one reason or another do not stand to be used are deemed to be considered muktzah. There's 5 basic categories of muktzah. Muktzah machmas gufay. The category consists of items that are not foods or kalim, stones, money, animals, are muktzah machmas gufay. Then you have muktzah machmas chisar and kiss. This refers to kalim whose primary function is not normally performed on Shabbos and whose owners do not allow them to be used for anything else because they're valuable and are concerned that they may become damaged. A surgeon's scalpel, for example. This tool must be kept in perfect condition because if the owner, the doctor, will not allow it to be used for anything else, he's not going to cut an apple with a knife that he has to use for a surgery. So that's going to be muktzah machmas chisar and kiss. Okay. Number 3 is muktzah is klisha malachta le'isr, a keli that's used for work on Shabbos. This group consists of kelim that are made to be used for a malacha on Shabbos that can be used in a normal, not normal, but in a way that's much. For example, a hammer may be used for building. It was made for building, which is also boina, but sometimes can be used for cracking nuts, which is mutter. Since these items can be used for many functions without being damaged, they are not muktzah on account of chisar and kiss, and the muktzah restrictions are lighter. One may move them in order to use them for an activity that's mutter on Shabbos, or because one needs the space that they're occupying. Let's say if you left a hammer on the couch on Shabbos, and you need to sit on the couch, you're allowed to move it. One may not move them for their own protection. You're not allowed to take it out of the sun because it might get ruined. Mechama l'tzel, or to safeguard them from theft, that you're not allowed to do. Now you have a basis l'davar ha'aser, a base to a muktzah object. This is an item that's not muktzah in its own right, but is being used to hold or support something that's muktzah. For example, a bed which has money on it. The base is the bed, so the bed itself is muktzah, even if the muktzah item is going to be removed. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon have differ greatly regarding the extent that he is Isser Muktzah. Rabbi Yehuda is much stricter in regard to Muktzah than Rabbi Shimon. The Machlekes is complex and affects a number of areas in halacha. In some cases, halacha follows one Tana. In other cases, halacha follows the other Tana. The fifth concept of Muktzah is Noilod, which means born. Noilod refers to something that first became usable on Shabbos. Such items cannot obviously be considered prepared before the day began. For example, an egg was laid on Shabbos. It didn't exist before Shabbos, so you can't use that either. Now, another concept midrabanon is uvda dechol, weekday activity. The Rabbanon answered any activity that's not in essence a specifically Shabbos activity. Obviously, this Isser does not ban every activity that's done during the week. This Isser applies only to activities that the Rabbanon banned, the Chachamim banned, and they generally fall into one of three categories. It looks like a malacha, or it may lead to a malacha, or it takes away from the spirit of Shabbos. If it's daima to a malacha, these are forbidden not because they might lead to a malacha, because they bear a faint resemblance to one. An example would be stretching a cloth strainer over the top of a container, which is forbidden because it somewhat resembles building a roof over something. And activities that may lead to a malacha, these are part of the process that includes a malacha, and activities that detract from the spirit of Shabbos, either because they involve unnecessary or excessive effort, or because they make Shabbos appear to look like an ordinary weekday. And this would be the regular uvda dechol. Let's say a bike wouldn't be muktzah. Some people would say not to do it. Alt uvda dechol. The next isser would be mimtzei chevtzecha. Mimtzei chevtzecha is v'daber davar, is pursuing your affairs and speaking words. Yeshaya Hanavi tells us mimtzei chevtzecha v'daber davar. Mimtzei chevtzecha requires a person to avoid engaging in his weekday affairs, even if no malach is involved. For this reason, the Chachamim answered commercial transactions on Shabbos. They also answered all activities related to such transactions, such as weighing, measuring, counting precise amount of produce or other merchandise. The reading of documents, shtaris, was also included in this Isser, as was making arrangements or preparations for activities that are also on Shabbos. Based on the pasuk v'daber davar, the Rabbanon prohibited discussing plans to perform after Shabbos. Hachana, for after Shabbos, any act that's forbidden on Shabbos itself. They also asked us speaking about business affairs and making financial calculations. So the problem becomes, you're not allowed to do something to prepare something on Shabbos, something that's going to be after Shabbos. Let's say a person has an event Motzei Shabbos, and he wants to be awake for the event. L'mashal, Erev Pesach is Shabbos, and he wants to take a nap, so he should have koach for the Seder. It's hachana. You can't do that. So what do? You got to take a nap for Einik Shabbos, which you're supposed to do anyways. But in this situation, you would normally take a nap Erev Pesach, right? But maybe you would also normally take a nap on Shabbos Kodesh for Einik Shabbos. That's what you should do. You should say that you're doing it for Einik Shabbos, because if you're going to do it for after Shabbos, that's going to be hachana. Another concept of uvda dechol is amirul l'nachri, asking a guy to do a malacha for you. Midrabanan, it's also to ask a guy to do malacha for you, whether it's a malacha deraisa or whether it's a malacha derabanan. Rashi and Avodah Zarah holds that this is based on v'daber davar as well. It's also to benefit from a malacha done by a guy on Shabbos if he did it for the yid. This is forbidden whether the guy wants it, was told by a yid to do the malacha, or whether he did it on his own initiative. Being nana from a guy's malacha is also not only during Shabbos, but even after Shabbos, for the length of time it would take to do the forbidden activity. In this way, no advantage is gained from the fact that the guy did the malacha for you on Shabbos. So how do we ask goyim to turn on the lights or the air conditioner for us on Shabbos? That's why you gotta tell them, famous Maisa. The guy sees a guy walking down the street, he needs his light on, brings him into the house, he says, you have to be meramis to them because you can't tell them directly. So what do? You come into the house and you say, oh, it's so hot in here. So, or, famous Maisa, the guy brings the guy into his house, he says, it's very dark in here. He says, the show is, and he walks right out. Doesn't help. All right, then you should turn on the lights. Yeah, was versteht der Goy? Okay. Next concept is Meleches Haitzah, which is going to be more or less a Hakdama. So the first Mishnah, Meleches Haitzah, which is a malacha of transferring from one Rishos to another Rishos. Really, the main Isser is taking something from a Rishos HaYochid to Rishos HaRabim, or from Rishos HaRabim to Rishos HaYochid. Now, in order to understand what the malacha is, we have to understand what a Rishos HaRabim and what a Rishos HaYochid is. So there are four Rishuyas. There's Rishos HaYochid, there's Rishos HaRabim, there's a Carmelis, and a Makom P'tur. A Rishos HaYochid is a private domain. This is an enclosed area that measures at least 4 tvachim high by 4 tvachim wide, and it has walls at least 10 tvachim high, and it may be situated on the ground level, like a house, or below ground level, a pit in the ground. Although Rishos HaYochid literally means private domain, there's no need for it to have a private owner. Like other halachas, Rishos HaYochid and Rishos HaRabim have very different meanings, but for our purposes in Hilchos Shabbos right now, Rishos HaYochid literally means a private domain, but it doesn't need a bailam. Even a pillar in a street can be a Rishos HaYochid, provided that it has the right dimensions. The airspace above Rishos HaYochid is included in the Rishos HaYochid, and it's Oila Adla Rakia. Goes all the way up. A Rishos HaRabim is a public domain. It's an open area, such as a street or a road that's at least 16 amas wide, and it's used by the public. Some shitas hold that it also must have shishim ribui. So what exactly it needs. A Rishos HaRabim extends upwards only to the height of 10 tvachim. Above this, it's a Makom P'tur. Now, you can't really have anything. If you're in the Rishos HaRabim and you're carrying something higher than 10 tvachim, because you're in the Rishos HaRabim, that thing that you're carrying is still considered to be in the Rishos HaRabim for other reasons. Now, what about a Carmelis? A Carmelis is the area that's not a Rishos HaRabim, and it's not a Rishos HaYochid. It's not a Rishos HaRabim because it's not used by the public, or it's less than 16 amas wide. Let's say you have a street that's 10 amas wide. Or it's not a Rishos HaYochid because it doesn't have walls that are 10 tvachim high. Let's say it's 8 tvachim high. However, it measures at least 4 by 4 tvachim. A common example is an open field. The airspace above a Carmelis extends to the height of 10 tvachim, beyond which is deemed as a Makom P'tur. Now, what is a Makom P'tur? This is a place that's neither Rishos HaRabim or Rishos HaYochid, but also lacks the dimensions of 4 by 4 tvachim that would make it a Carmelis. So as we mentioned above, the airspace more than 10 tvachim above Rishos HaRabim or above a Carmelis are also a Makom P'tur. If you have a small garbage can or a fire hydrant, classic example, you're walking down the street, you realize you have a tissue in your pocket and you want to put it somewhere, so you're not mamshech with a haitzah. However, you do that with all the technicalities and all the difficulties and how to make sure that you're not going to, when you're walking, when you make sure you don't stop, you put it on the fire hydrant and the pump, whatever you want to call it, machalek zefeiskim, but I think for Hilchos Shabbos you call it a fire hydrant. So you put it on the fire hydrant because it doesn't have 4 by 4 tvachim, but it's an area. You put it on the little boxes by the traffic lights. You put it on the little boxes by the light posts. So that's going to be what you could do. Minatayra, the malacha of haitzah is limited to moving an item between a Rishos HaYochid or Rishos HaRabim, or Daled Amos being maver something Daled Amos Rishos HaRabim. Minatayra, it's not also to transfer an object between one of the two Rishuyos known as Carmelis or Makom P'tur. The Rabbanon ruled, however, that since a Carmelis resembles a Rishos HaRabim because it's open, and a Rishos HaYochid because it's not public, it must be treated with the chumras of Rishos HaRabim and Rishos HaYochid. Therefore, one may not carry an item 4 amos in a Carmelis, or between it and Rishos HaYochid, nor may one carry between Rishos HaRabim and a Carmelis as though it were a Rishos HaYochid. These dinim de Rabbanon do not apply to Makom P'tur. It's permitted to transfer an item from one area to a Makom P'tur and vice versa. Now we have the last concept we're going to discuss in the Akdama to Masechta Shabbos is going to be a Ruvei Chatzeris. What is a Ruvei Chatzeris? In the times of the Mishnayos, several houses would share a chatzer, or chatzeros. If a courtyard is enclosed by walls that are 10 tvachim high, it's Rishos HaYochid. So it should be mutter to carry from a house into the courtyard and from the courtyard into the house. The Chacham, however, were concerned that since the chatzer is more public than the houses, people might think that it's Rishos HaRabim. Therefore, if it would be mutter to carry between a house and a chatzer, people might be led to believe that it's also mutter to carry between a house and an actual Rishos HaRabim. To prevent people from making this mistake, the Rabbanon were geyser that carrying between a house and a courtyard is usher. Along with this isser, the Rabbanon provided a procedure in which the restrictions can be removed. This procedure is called a Ruvei Chatzeros, which involves collecting a loaf of bread from every household and placing all the loaves into one of the houses before Shabbos, or they could be mishtatef in the loaf of bread with the wine. This symbolizes that all the Chatzer's residents reside in the house that contains the bread, and the Chatzer can then be viewed as serving only that one house rather than several, and it no longer resembles the Rishus HaRabim. By being ma'achid everybody, we're turning it into a Rishus HaYachid. Midrabanan, so accordingly, the Issa D'Rabbanan, which assumed that the Chatzer would be mistaken for Rishus HaRabim, would not apply anymore. Ad kan introduction. Next year will be Parak Aleph.